Welcome to Unapologetically Sensitive, a place to find connection and a sense of belonging, where you can learn, relate, laugh, and maybe even live a bolder, brighter life. I'm your host, Patricia Young. This is a weekly podcast where we talk about sensitivity and the richness that it adds, the strengths we have because of our sensitivity, and some of the challenges it poses as well. The information in this podcast is not a substitute for help from a licensed mental health professional. Hey there, to the creatives, healers, sensitives, and deep thinkers. Welcome. I'm so glad you're here today. This is a really great interview. It's with Rhonda Hess, who is another podcaster, and I met her in a podcasting group that I created on Facebook. I'm not going to say too much because you'll be able to hear about it in the interview, but some of the things that we talk about in this episode are, in the beginning when both of us started our podcast, we were feeling really vulnerable, and Rhonda talks about feeling like she was a mess early in the podcasting process and how being in this podcasting group was really a blessing for her. And we talk about how, as highly sensitive people, we often impact people just by showing up without even realizing that we have these great ways of connecting with people and we don't even realize it. Rhonda talks about feeling overwhelmed and the importance of feeling seen and heard and some of the shame and embarrassment that come up, and the importance of having practitioners, whether they're therapists or doctors or mentors, that are knowledgeable about the traits of being highly sensitive and what can happen when we don't have practitioners that have that awareness and sensitivity. Rhonda has a number of autoimmune disorders, and she talks about some of the things that she's really sensitive to and how that impacts her body. And this is really common for highly sensitive people to be sensitive to caffeine or alcohol or prescription medications. Towards the end of the conversation, I love it, Rhonda had a medical doctor who was incredibly insensitive to her. And I love what she said to this doctor. And we end up having a conversation about some of the injuries that we experience as highly sensitive people if we go and see a medical provider, and just because they can't figure out what's going on with us, they often haven't received the training to say, like, I really don't know, let's keep looking. So they often will make it about us or discount us, and that can be incredibly hurtful and harmful. So let me tell you a little bit about Rhonda. Rhonda Hess is an international business coach and founder of Prosperous Coach since 2006. Her clients say she has a superpower for helping coaches choose a smart niche and launch their business with confidence. In 2001, she designated the certification program for Coach Training Alliance. After training 500 coaches herself, she turned her focus to helping coaches with the marketing side, because it doesn't matter how great a coach you are if no one knows about you. After 8 years of award-winning blogging last year, Rhonda started Prosperous Coach Podcast to help more coaches earn more and market less. It's so fun. Anyways, I hope you really enjoy this conversation. Rhonda is a highly sensitive person, and some of the things that she talks about are specific memories that she has of being a child and how she really was not seen, heard, or honored in her family. And I think a lot of you are really going to relate to it. So now, on to the show. Hey, Rhonda, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here with you today.
I'm really excited about this conversation that we're going to be having. Rhonda, do you identify as a highly sensitive person?
Oh, yeah. Yep. It's a perfect description for me.
And when did you learn you were a highly sensitive person?
When Elaine Aron, I think that's her name, came out with the book, Highly Sensitive Person, that was just when I was training to become a coach. And my radar was really up for any kind of self-help book that grabbed my attention. And just her title made me feel seen and heard. I was like, oh my God, this is about me. And I grabbed the book and I didn't put it down until I finished the book. I think I read it in a weekend, and that's pretty rare for me. Nonfiction doesn't usually hold my attention like that. So it was a wonderful moment in time for me.
Oh, good deal. And what do you think of the term highly sensitive person?
I think it's pretty descriptive. I don't think, there's a lot of worse things that I've been called. Like people have called me fragile, and they've said I'm the canary in the coal mine. And that I'm a crybaby, stuff like that. And I just think a highly sensitive person is very honoring. It doesn't really hold any judgment, the term. And so I'm really happy that she wrote that book and came up with that.
Yeah, that's great. I think that was around the 90s when her book came out. I'm not positive. So you've known for a pretty fair amount of time. That's kind of a gift.
Yeah, it's nice. It really freed me up.
Yeah. Is there another term that you wish were used instead?
I have a naturopath who I found in my mid 30s and who I've been seeing ever since. And he calls me an orchid.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's kind of sweet, you know?
They've used that in the writing, and there's some controversy because many men don't want to be referred to as orchids, but it kind of goes back to the concept of differential susceptibility, which is similar to an orchid, what I call the proper care and feeding of the HSP. That if you put an orchid with the right light and the right amount of food and water, they just thrive, but they need to have these special conditions to really be magnificent. And the same thing with a highly sensitive person, that when we get enough rest and we have a lifestyle that works for us and we've got people that support us in our lives and all of those things, we really thrive. We do very well in positive environments. The same is true that if we're in a negative environment, we don't do as well and we're more affected than non-highly sensitive people. So that's a really accurate term. Guys, I don't know. I don't know what a good term would be. I don't think you want to be called an orchid. I don't know. Maybe you do.
Well, orchids are kind of cooler than they used to be. So maybe it'll have a better effect.
Yeah, I really think that men get kind of the raw end of the deal here because sensitivity isn't really viewed upon positively, whether you're male or female in the United States. There are some countries that honor sensitivity more than others. But on top of that, again, to have terms like orchid really doesn't fit for a guy. And so, I know Ted Zeff has done an awful lot of work about men and sensitivity. Anyways, I would love to talk a little bit about how we met because I think that's relevant to the conversation. Then I think what we're going to do is jump into talking about our questions. And then depending on how much time we have, we'll weave in some other things that we've talked about, but I'm just not sure how we're going to do time-wise. How does that sound?
That sounds great.
So I met you probably, I would think last fall or early summer last year, that I had started a small Facebook group for people that were just starting podcasting. I'm in a couple of larger groups. Well, you are too. But sometimes for launching, I really felt like I wanted more support. I wanted people that were going to be in the same place that I was, so that we kind of had the same group of needs. And so I probably found you in a larger podcasting group and asked if you wanted to join. I honestly don't remember. Tell me what your recollection is.
I think that's right. I think it might have been She Podcasts
Mm-hmm.
that you found me in. I had just joined that group. I was just starting to ask a few questions or something. And I think you must have seen a question that I asked and recognized that it was a newbie podcaster and reached out to me. And I have to tell you, I hope you don't mind that I gush a little bit because I would not be podcasting if it wasn't for you.
I'm really glad we're talking about this. It's hard for me to understand. And you and I have talked a little bit, and I'll share a little bit more about how our relationship has unfolded. But for me, I just showed up and was myself. From my perspective, I don't feel like I did anything above and beyond. And the reason why I want to have this conversation with you is I think this is true for many highly sensitive people, that our ability to connect with people and to make a difference exceeds what non-HSPs do, but we don't even realize we're doing it because it's just how we're wired. So back to you.
Yeah. Well, I think that as fellow HSPs, there might have been something there. I don't know about you, but I do attract HSPs. I attract clients that are HSPs. I attract friends these days that are HSPs. And maybe you recognize that in me. I don't know. Maybe just by osmosis you did. I really believe in energetics. And so, that could have been part of it. For me, what really happened was, as an HSP, big groups, and She Podcasts is a huge Facebook group. I must say that a lot of these podcasting Facebook groups do an amazing job of creating that nice connective environment, even though there's so many people in it. For me, when you reached out and invited me to your group, and it was just a few people, that was perfect for me because as an HSP, the smaller the group, the better for me.
Mm-hmm.
The less voices, the less stimulation, the less confusion, that just makes it so much easier for me to show up and be fully present. That was that. But also, I think I was very lucky in that I came to the group when you and several others in the group were quite a few steps ahead of me, but not so far ahead of me that you couldn't remember what it was like to be a new podcaster. You, Patricia, your energy is always about what do you need? What's going on? And you're so open to any kind of question, any kind of post in the Facebook group. I got that sense right away that I could be vulnerable, that I could show you how much of a mess I felt I was, especially in those early days with the podcasting. And as we went on, and there were a couple times where we actually met on Zoom, and I got to see your face and connect with you one on one. That just endeared me to you. Wait, what do I mean? Endeared you to me. Maybe that's what I mean to say. So much more because we had been a one on one relationship. And I consider you a good friend. And I consider you someone who, if we were in the same town, I'd want to go hang with you.
Aw, my eyes are a little watery that I really think that in some ways I honestly do not take in or think about how my showing up in the world impacts other people. I don't know if it's a good thing or a bad thing. It just is. So there's a part of me that feels like, the kid that says to the mom, like, tell me about the night I was born again. That there's something that's really nice hearing how you experience me reflected. Like, I'm really appreciating that. And it's a little hard to take in because from my perspective, like, I don't know, I just showed up and did what I always do. So I think it's really important that we have these conversations with the people in our lives.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah.
Yeah. If you ever need a hit of that from me, let's just have a conversation because I really do feel in the deepest part of my heart that I wouldn't have made it without you in podcasting. There's a lot at the very beginning that's just very confusing. And I had even paid for a training program, and the people in that training program just weren't quite as accessible as you were. And so to get a question answered might take a week and a half when I need an answer today or tomorrow.
Right.
Yeah, so that there was that, but also just the energy of the people who were in the group. And I really feel like that has a lot to do with you, that you both recognize in other people high quality people. And when I say that, I don't mean to cut anybody else down. I just mean the people in that group are so heartful, so loving, so supportive, so open. And that's my kind of person.
Yeah. It really is an amazing group. And what I've done is because the bigger groups, I couldn't get the answers and the feedback. It's like I kind of want to create my own little group. And when Tim Weinecke was on, I shared that when I was learning to edit, it was really overwhelming. And he was willing to jump on a Zoom call with me and to let me watch him edit because it felt really overwhelming. And I think this is what happens with highly sensitive people, that our capacity to do things is amazing. And we go into overwhelm really easily. And so every time we learn a new skill, like with the podcasting, there's all these skills that you have to learn. And so I think having that smaller connection really works for us. As it turns out over time where you and I have developed this relationship, and I realized that I want to do more coaching, and the work that I've been doing really does fall under coaching. You're a coach. And so I've reached out to you and you've met with me one-on-one privately and shared your resources with me and talked to me about coaching and helped guide me. I feel really blessed in return because I'm getting the benefit of your expertise without ever having gone into the relationship thinking like, okay, what do you have to give me? It just ended up unfolding that way. And I think in the way that you feel appreciative about what I've been able to offer to you, I have that same sense of gratitude, like, oh my gosh, I have this amazing resource for all this new stuff that I don't really know how to do.
Oh, that makes me feel so good. You know how it is when someone helps you, you really want to return the favor. I feel like now what we have is sort of this figure eight. There's sort of this open connection that feels like it's almost always there. Like I feel like if I sent you a text, you'd be back in touch within 24 hours, even if it was just to say, I'm buried right now. I'll get back to you on such and such a day. I feel like there wouldn't be this sort of dead air over there that I don't know if you're going to communicate. And I hope you know the same thing about me.
I think I do, and you've been really responsive when I posted in some of the groups. And now you have a podcast, you have your own Facebook group, and we did an online meeting, I don't know, last week or the week before, and I started to go into overwhelm. And I don't know that I would have named that in the past with people, but really, I don't know about you, but having this podcast is really growing me up and being able to talk about the things that I struggle with, to see where I've got strengths and skills. It's been an incredibly transformational process. But when you and I were on this online call, like I said, I just need to name what's going on. I'm feeling really overwhelmed right now, and I'm feeling saturated. And what felt really nice to me is you being a highly sensitive person, you got that. And had you not understood that, you probably would have continued to barrage me with more information because we would have needed to accomplish a goal during that time. And I felt really seen and heard and honored. And I think that for me, I have a little bit of shame and embarrassment that comes up when I get really flooded and there's a lot of new stuff going on, which is again why I want to talk about this. So for the listeners, why it can be really beneficial that when we're learning new skills, or we go for therapy or coaching or personal training, whatever it is, that the benefits of having somebody that at least is familiar with the traits of being a highly sensitive person, the practitioner is able to respond to us in a way that we feel seen and heard. And I think with non-HSPs, or people that are not familiar with people that are highly sensitive, the tendency is to try and push us through to be like a non-HSP. That really doesn't honor our needs. And so that really was the gift in working with you, that I felt a little vulnerable saying it, and you really got it.
Yeah. And I want you to know that I don't have any judgment about it at all, ever, for you. And yet I do get that sense of personal shame. If in the times where I feel like I can't handle something, I do feel shame. Can I give you for example?
Oh, yeah. I love those.
This just aggravates me. It makes me mad sometimes, but I have trouble in spring and summer because even though I actually don't have allergies, I've been tested numerous times. I have absolutely zero allergies. I am greatly affected by pollen. It affects my nervous system, and it affects my gut, my belly. And it's so sad, but almost always when springtime and summertime comes, I'm just not able to go outside very much, because even 30 minutes of exposure out there and I start getting really jacked up and my gut starts hurting really badly. And I've tried lots of drugs, I've tried lots of supplements, I've tried lots of techniques, and the sad thing is it's just a reality. And one of the ways that I connect with my friends is by taking walks. I love taking one-on-one walks with my friends, walking and talking. That's my favorite thing to do. When it hits this time of year, that's not happening. And so a friend of mine dropped by yesterday and she was saying, so, you're inside then for the rest of the spring and summer. And I was like, "Ugh, I just hate that. It embarrasses me. I hate it. I feel like such a wimp. I feel like people don't believe that I really have an experience that is very hard to take, and it takes me a fair amount of energy to manage." And she was like, yeah, it makes me really sad too. I miss the idea of walking with you for the next 3 or 4 months. That's just really, really sad to me, but I'm here for you, you know?
Mm.
So yeah, I get that shame thing.
Yeah, and I would venture to guess that every single person who's listening has at least one area in their life where they feel that way. We're already in the minority, and whatever it is that we have around our sensitivity that most other people don't experience, I think it just brings up that sense of, why can't I be like everybody else?
Mm-hmm.
And there are ways that we can work with it so it's not debilitating, spiraling shame. And I think it's really easy to have that desire to look at what other people are doing and want to be able to participate in life at that level, and to have limitations and find ways that we work with our limitations and we come to peace with it. We may not like it, but we come to some level of peace with it.
Yeah, there's this thing of belonging.
Mm-hmm.
And certainly the older I've gotten, the easier it is for me to find my own belonging within myself and find it even amongst my friends who, as they get older, they're getting more sensitive to experiences and things. And so they're starting to really get where I've been all this time.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But it is that that need for belonging is so strong and so primal, I think.
Yep. And I think highly sensitive people tend to feel like we're the misfits and there's something that's different about us because we are such a small part of the population, unless you happen to live and be surrounded by other highly sensitive people, which is why Dr. Aaron talks about the importance of having other highly sensitive people in your life, because it's so validating and normalizing because we're a minority.
Yeah. I really wonder if it's on the rise.
Having more people that are highly sensitive.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I heard Dr. Elaine Aron speak last summer at UC Santa Cruz. I went to a retreat for a couple of days. She was saying that highly sensitive people may make up as much as 30% of the population. I haven't seen any statistics on that. It's an innate trait, and it's their survival instinct. They've found it in at least 100 animal species, and in the animals that they've identified it in, it is a survival instinct. So you could be right.
Here's my thought. So I don't know. Some people listening to this might not believe in climate change, but I do think that as it gets hotter, as it gets colder, as it gets wetter, as there's more fires, as the flora and fauna of the world are responding to the climate changes, I think that's one factor of sensitivity that I see coming on. The other thing is the way we live with cell phones that we carry around with us like they're our buddies, and always being on screen, being plugged in and connected to this really kind of cold electronic thing. I think that our bodies are really not made for that. And just the barrage of messaging coming to us all day, all sorts of messaging that causes us to have to be in a constant filtering place. I just feel like all of those factors, and probably many I haven't mentioned, are adding a lot to our nervous systems. And people go outside less, they spend less time in the dirt. They spend less time using their bodies for work. We sit more. There's this thing of, sitting and craning our necks at our devices, and all of that is just very stagnating. I think that on an energetic level, as well as on a just purely physical level and an emotional level, there's just an awful lot more coming at us in the last 20 years than there were when I was younger.
Yeah, it's certainly possible. I don't really have a response, so I'm just going to be transparent with you. You know, what goes on in my brain as I'm listening is I go back to what I know about the research, that it's an innate trait, but I think the things that you're bringing up are all valid thing. And when you talked about being connected to your cell phone, it's like ears down, tail between my legs. Yeah, that would be me, knowing that I'm way too dependent on my phone than I should be, and I just don't seem to be able to break that habit consistently. But yeah, it makes sense what you're saying.
Well, you're not alone. I mean, who doesn't carry their phone around with them anymore? At night I do try to put it away and things like that, but during the day I've noticed that if I don't know where my phone is, that's a really rare thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, I believe it's innate. I also just think that we're learning more and more about how we are affected in the womb. There's a word for this, and I can't quite
Is
reach
it
it.
epigenetics?
Epigenetics are really, my naturopath is really into epigenetics right now, and he keeps telling me things that he's learning about what we are pulling from that environment of the womb and what our parents are doing. So I really wonder about the kids being born now, whether because their mom is carrying around her phone all the time. Are there pros or cons to that in terms of their nervous systems, in terms of their sensitivity?
Yeah, I'm sure there are. And they've done research studies where they can train a rat to be afraid of a bell or the color blue, and the rat's offspring will be afraid of the color blue or a bell. So we do know with epigenetics that that is transmitted from generation to generation. I have this feeling about cell phones and what we're going to find out in the future. I don't want to go down that path because it's a little too much for the listeners and for me, but yeah, we just don't know. What are some of the challenges that you experience being a highly sensitive person?
Well, the sort of overarching one that I've only really realized in the last 10 years is that it starts with my nervous system. There's overwhelm in my nervous system. So I feel so ridiculous in some ways saying what affects me, but bright lights, repetitive or loud noises, strong smells, dogs barking, any kind of just relentless stimulation, I get jacked up and I want to escape. There's literally this flight response in me. And as an adult who has a business, and because running my business is pretty much what I do most of the days, I have to modulate the effects of that. I have to really find a way to manage that. Sometimes the way I manage it is to stop what I'm doing. If it's a lot of noise, I might put earplugs in. I might just lay down on the floor and rest and breathe. I wish I did that more than I do. I'm trying to train myself to become more responsive to that. But I also override it a lot. When I've got to get something done or whatever, I just override it. And then when I get to the end of the day, I am so tapped out.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting. I had a couple of thoughts when you were talking. Dr. Aaron talks about the 4 core characteristics of being a highly sensitive person, and it spells the acronym DOES or DOES. So depth of processing, overwhelm, overstimulation. There's Gracie. Emotional empathy, emotional responsiveness and empathy. And then the S is what you were talking about, which is sensitivity to sensory stimuli. So lights, noise, sounds, that's part of how we're wired. And yes, we do get really jacked up, or our nervous systems can get on over arousal when there's too much of that stimulation going on in the environment. I think that's true. It's funny, I've noticed recently that when really exciting things are going on, it feels like every one of my nerves is on fire, and it's really good stuff, but it's like it's too much and I don't know how to turn the volume down, which again is what we're talking about. It's that over arousal and finding ways that we can calm and soothe when, it's like every nerve seems to be on fire.
Yeah. My naturopath taught me that breathing method, where you close one nostril with a finger and you breathe in and out, and then you close the other nostril with a finger and breathe in and out. And I'm sure there's a name for that type of breathing, but
I think it's called pranayama breathing.
That really helps my nervous system. The other thing that really works for me is darkness. Darkness helps immeasurably. I have blackout blinds in several of the rooms of my house because I have a lot of windows in this house. That helps a lot. If I can't get enough relief, I will go into a closet, a walk-in closet, and I'll just lay down on the floor. It sounds so strange, but actually that's where my podcasting room is a walk-in closet. So I'll just go be with my podcast room. But for me too, it's also substances. I've quit drinking. Caffeine whacks me out. I love chocolate. I haven't given it up yet, but I have to really be careful not to take too much of it in. And it kind of, so a lot of foods will jack me up too. Types of people, there are a lot of people that I just can't be with because they're so intense energetically, and they could be really lovely human beings, by the way. My husband has a friend, a lifelong friend, who is just a peach of a guy. I love him so much, but more than 30 minutes with him just sends me kind of spinning off into the ether. I just can't. His energy is just too intense for me. And he's loud too.
Yep. We have somebody that my kids grew up with. And when my kids were little, we spent a lot of time with this family. And now it's like, it's just too loud. I can't, there's too much. It's just too loud. I want to go back to what are some of the other foods and substances that you find really impact you? Just because it's not something we always talk about. And maybe some of the listeners will go like, oh, I had no idea.
Yeah. Black pepper. Any kind of black pepper tends to give me heart palpitations. Now, that may be something else. I don't know, but it just seems like a weird thing to have a reaction to. A lot of drugs, so over-the-counter drugs for allergies, I've tried all of them in order to help me have a better summertime. And they actually have this effect that I think is counterintuitive. Like if you take Benadryl, for example, a lot of people get kind of dopey and slow reactive times. And most over-the-counter allergy remedies and things like that make me just so jittery, like I've had 10 cups of coffee. A lot of other kinds of drugs that doctors have tried to give me as treatments for some of the things I have going on with my body have gone the other way. They've done exactly the opposite of what they hoped they would do. So I've just learned over the years to rarely take any kind of pharmaceutical if I can get away with it. And if a doctor prescribes something, then I usually just self change the dosage. Like if they say take one pill twice a day, I'll take a quarter pill once a day. Sometimes my naturopath will even say, don't take this yet, just carry it around in your pocket for for a couple of weeks until your body calibrates to it, and then, take a quarter of the dose and titrate up. So I've just really learned that less is more with me.
And that's really common with highly sensitive people, that we tend to be much more sensitive to medications and pharmaceuticals. And it's not uncommon that we need, like you said, half or a quarter of the dose. And I want to be very clear. I am not advising that you mess with your medications. I'm not a healthcare practitioner. I'm not giving anybody advice. So I want to be very clear about that. I'm just stating in general that what you're saying is what is very common for highly sensitive people.
Yeah. And over the years, I'll tell you what this has really done for me is I have learned to be my own best judge of what's right for me. And I'm right 99.9% of the time. So if I have a intuition about, I don't think I should do that, or I should take a sip and wait 20 minutes and see if that'll work for me. I'll give you another example. This morning we went to the farmer's market, and I live in Boulder, Colorado, which is a, pretty hip place. And everybody's a foodie here. And there's a booth there for selling kombucha. I don't even know if half the people that listening to your podcast are going to know what kombucha is.
I love kombucha.
I do too. And I used to drink it. I loved what it did for my belly, particularly. But I was just really tempted. They had a cranberry lavender kombucha. And so I got a cup of it. And I said to my husband, now, I don't know how I'm going to react to this. So you may be drinking the rest of this. I took 3 sips and I felt like I'd had 4 cocktails.
Oh.
I was just so loopy, and I just could feel it all the way through my system. I was drunk. 4 little sips. And so, I gave the cup to him.
Yeah, it's funny. I just read in one of the online HSP groups, somebody asking about alcohol and said something very similar to what you're saying. I don't drink. I've had less than 10 alcoholic beverages in my life. And the only ones that I like are sweet and food-like, because I struggle with food. So I've made a choice to kind of stay away from alcohol. And it's funny that I had to find a kombucha that was really low in sugar and doesn't have a lot of caffeine in it, because I'm really sensitive to caffeine. And I'll open a bottle and it'll take me, I don't know, maybe a week to go through it. I'll have a sip every now and then. But I had a client who, because I bring the glass bottles, I fill them with water. I don't like using plastic containers. So she was always curious about my kombucha. So I brought her a bottle one day and she took a sip and she's like, oh, Lordy, this has so much alcohol in it. And I really had this thing of like, I have this belief about myself that I don't drink alcohol, but I drink a little kombucha every day and wondering, like, am I having hooch every day and not even realizing it?
It's a fermented beverage. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
But of course, there's a lot of health benefits. And yet, there's a lot of healthy things out there that I just can't do. I just my body goes, no, no, I'm not gonna. I haven't mentioned that I have some autoimmune things going on with my body, and they started fairly young, actually. I think I've really tried to figure out what the chicken and the egg is here. I have a theory that my sensitivity and how things affect my nervous system might have created some of these chronic illnesses that I experience.
Throw out your theory. Let's take a look at it.
Yeah, well, that's my theory. My theory is that I have memories of being an infant,
Wow.
and here it's kind of sad, and it might make me cry, but when I was an infant, I'm the fourth child, and I have three older brothers, and so when I was born, I was extremely sensitive, and my mom really just didn't know what to do with me, frankly. And my loud brothers, who were intense and jumping around and they were making noise, and they were sort of, they'd get up in my face, and I just really did not respond well to that. So the way that my mom decided to deal with it was to put me in my room by myself a lot.
Mm.
And there were some really good things about that, because I did learn to do well being by myself. But I also think that I'm empathic. So I would often send my energy out of my body to reach out to my family in other parts of the house. And I remember doing it as a little girl, a really little girl. And I think that that wasn't so good. And so I wasn't part of the family in a lot of ways. Just being the only girl is one part. Being the youngest is one part, but also being highly sensitive. And I remember all of these experiences. Like, we would go to the drive-in movie together as a family, and there'd be shoot 'em up kind of things happening or something, and I'd start crying, and I'd get a migraine, and my mom would have to take me out of the car, because I was disturbing everybody, not only the carload of family, but the people next to us and next to them and next to them. And she'd be angry because I was ruining everybody's experience. And then inevitably, I couldn't calm down. So we would leave the movie and we'd go home. My brothers would be so angry with me. They just didn't understand. Nobody understood what was going on with me. And there would be pictures of me. I think what happened was the camera would come out at, birthdays and holidays and stuff like that. And those times were so intense for me because there's lots of people around and there's lots of activities happening, and it's all kind of heightened energy and lots of different foods and all that kind of stuff. And I did not do well in those celebrations. And so my parents, somebody would pick up a camera and try to take a picture of me, and I'd either, the photograph would either end up with me looking like a deer in headlights, or I'd be crying. So then my parents just stopped taking pictures of me.
Oh.
Yeah, and to this day, I really hate having my picture taken. And I think it's really not about having my picture taken. It's the connection to those times when I was so innervated and jacked up by all the things going on around me. And my mom didn't have any tools in her toolbox. And my father was an alcoholic too, so that added to it. And so there were just no tools to deal with a sensitive child. I was also very emotionally adept. I could feel, and I still to this day can feel what other people feel, sometimes even before they are acknowledging their feelings. I can also feel physical things that people have going on with their body, sometimes even before they know that they're having those physical feelings. So it just was a lot. The overall response was go to your room, which felt like a punishment.
Yeah, yeah. First of all, I'm really sorry that you experienced that. That really sounds awful, and my heart feels sad for you. I love how descriptive it is because there are parts of your story that are very similar to mine. And what I'm confident about is that there are people that are listening right now that have a parallel version of that story. So, can we go back and just look at it a little bit?
Yeah.
So when I was a baby, I had colic and I cried all the time. My mom said she had to carry me around like a football. Again, what you're talking about is, you had this sense of being overwhelmed and overstimulated, being in a household full of boys and needing to have quiet and soothing. You were isolated in a room where you really needed a sense of connection and belonging. And in my family, my mom was a single parent and was really overwhelmed. She left home, I think at 14 or 15 because of abuse in her family. So if I had feelings, I had to go to my room. So the message that we get is how we show up in the world isn't okay. Our feelings aren't okay. If we're having any kind of emotional experience, it's too much for other people. We're too much and we need to be separate. And that's kind of where this break comes about, embracing and loving the traits that we have and knowing that it's a superpower to have deep feelings and deep thinking. We don't get that out the gate. We get the message that how we show up in the world is not okay.
Yeah.
And then with the experience of going to the drive-in, like too much stimulation, and highly sensitive people don't like violence and loud things. It's again, it assaults our nervous system, and it was too much. And instead of your family being able to honor that or to make choices that would work for you and for everybody, or to create separate activities. I mean, I'm not saying that they should have had this knowledge, and just looking at what happened and looking at how could it have been done differently. Then everybody's upset with you because you're wired a certain way and it doesn't work for you. And the adults didn't have the ability to know, like, this isn't going to be a good choice for the family. So we need to do something else. But then everybody ends up feeling angry at you. You get overwhelmed and overstimulated. Your parents aren't able to help you regulate. I mean, I just feel sad. And I think so many of us have had those types of experiences.
Yeah. It's really interesting because I feel like you sent me some questions before we were going to meet today just to prepare me a little bit. And I loved, do you mind if I go into this?
Yeah, please. And then why don't you let the listeners know what the questions are?
Yeah, well, there were so many good ones. So I'll explain that in just a second. But I just want to say that reading the questions that you gave me, the effect that it had on me is I went inside myself and I recalled things. I was able to sort of connect the dots. Even this was just last night that I was doing this. I was starting to connect some dots that I'm not sure that I had fully connected before. Like they were sort of lining up. But one of the things you asked how I felt about being an HSP, which it's interesting to look at that. And I thought a lot about how I felt as a child, not knowing that I had a condition, if you will, or an innate gift or whatever you want to call it, but that it really set me apart from people as opposed to gave me the sense of belonging that I wanted to. And you asked me here today, what are some of the challenges that I experienced? And I don't know if I should go into all these other questions because you might ask them, but
I'll go ahead and ask them to you. But for the listeners, there's the questions that I ask all of the HSP guests when we have time to cover them. So I have a sheet that I send out to all potential guests so that they can start thinking about some of the questions. Because again, as highly sensitive people, we're deep thinkers. And for me, when I've been a guest on somebody's podcast, you're going to get a better interview out of me if you let me know ahead of time some of the things that you're going to ask me, because then I can really mull it over and really give you a richer answer than answering in the moment. That's how we operate.
Yeah, exactly. So one of the other things that just really came up that I feel is very, very poignant for me and helpful for me in the question that you asked is that I was in grade school and high school and college. I was painfully shy and extremely self-conscious. And it's been something that has kind of dogged me all my life because also I'm a very courageous and sort of bold person. And I have my own business and I've done a lot of really, out in the spotlight kind of things with my business. And yet I'm shy, I'm introverted, and I'm self-conscious in a really strong way. And I've always really battled that part inside of me because I think my personality is actually quite bold. And my personality is I laugh a lot and I'm goofy. I have a really goofy little girl inside of me. I like to play, I like to joke. The other thing that's going on that's very loud inside of me is this self-consciousness because and this is what I realized is that I really had that bred into me in my family.
Yeah. And so, what I want to share is of highly sensitive people, so we're only 20% of the population. Of that 20%, it's divided equally among men and women. 70% of HSPs are introverts and 30% are extroverts. And initially, Dr. Aaron thought that shyness was the same as being a highly sensitive person, but as she did more research, she realized that they are two separate things. But it makes sense if you put us in a group with non-HSPs that are loud and extroverted, there's too much stimulation, there's too much noise. I always think about the old cartoon of Chip and Dale. No, after you. No, you first. No, please, thank you. That's kind of how HSPs play. We're very good at turn taking and making sure that everybody gets their needs met. So if you have a small group of people that have similar values, i.e. HSPs, we do really well. We want that sense of connection and belonging. But if we have to jockey for attention or fight to get our needs met, that doesn't really work for us. It's too overstimulating. It's just not how we're wired. So it really makes sense with what you're talking about. And this is why for HSPs, when we're able to create lifestyles that really work for us, again, Dr. Aaron talks about HSPs are great workers and we're great entrepreneurs because then we can create lifestyles that work. And if you put me in a venue where I'm with like-minded people, I'm incredibly confident. But if you put me in a huge group of people where I have to fight and jockey to make a place for myself, I'm like, it's too much. I got nothing to say. So I just share that because I want to validate not only for you, but for the listeners that yes, when you put us in small groups where we're seen and heard, we are incredibly bold and courageous, have an awful lot to give, but we are not naturally going to fight to get attention if we're in a group where we're not being seen and heard.
Yeah. Yeah. And I can look back into so many big group situations that I put myself into because people around me were doing that. I have friends who love to go to trainings. They love to go to conferences. They love to go to concerts. They love to go to these places where there's a lot of value in them, a lot of great things happening there. These days, I very rarely put myself in that situation because the fallout is large. There's a recovery period for me that's pretty significant. It really throws me off of my day to day. Whereas, for a lot of my friends, to go to a 3-day outdoor concert where there's 5,000 people there and constant music and just, it's lovely and everything. And they're just no problem with the heat and the sun and the noise and all of that. But for me to do something like that, it leaves me panting and sick. And, you know, I laugh because it's sad because I want to be in those places. I want to experience those things, but they just don't work for me at all. And so I live by a lot of people's terms of a pretty small life.
And it's something that really works for us. There's a great little graphic that I've seen on social media that it's like my childhood punishments have become my adult fantasies. Going to bed early, staying in at night, having to read, going to my room. And it's like that thing of JOMO. We've got FOMO, fear of missing out. But I think for many HSPs, there's JOMO, the joy of missing out.
Yeah.
And again, we live in a very extroverted culture. And so that's the messages that we see that nobody has memes about, I'm staying in my pajamas tonight and I'm going to curl up and read a good book. Woohoo.
Yeah.
And that's what charges us up and fills us up. And then the other thing that I wanted to just comment on that you said is we don't do as well when we're being observed and we feel that there's pressure. We tend to be so aware of everything that we're saying and doing that we've just the way that we're wired, we're so much more in tune. And so again, in groups and where we feel like we're being observed, we just may not function as well.
Yeah. Or authentically. I think that that's the other thing that I've really realized is that even if I go to a dinner party with my closest friends, just that amount of energy. And, they're drinking, although I wouldn't say any of my friends are, overdo it or anything like that. But there is an energy to alcohol when it's in the room and when it's in the bodies of your friends. And so just that, 8 good friends, great food, wonderful conversation. I feel like I don't quite show up as my true self because there is a fairly large amount of my energy going to modulating and sort of working with my nervous system. I feel kind of sad and kind of bad about that, because I one of the most strong values I have is that I want to be known and I want to know people. I want intimacy. I want you, Patricia, to know who I am. And I want to know who you are at the deepest part of your soul and heart and spirit. It's very hard to achieve that with this level of sensitivity unless people are willing to be one on one with me.
Right. Well, I was thinking unless there's another HSP in the group and the two of you pair up and have a really intimate conversation.
Yeah. So I have some really wonderful friends who do, I think, know me pretty well. And I think that they don't always see what I prefer to be showing when I'm in group situations. I'm awkward. I'm a bit more reserved than I'd like to be. I'm just managing so much within myself.
Mm-hmm. I found if I go to, because I have that same thing. So if I go to a party, if I have a role, if I get there before other people get there, then I get acclimated as more people show up. If I have a role and I'm helping to set things up or helping people with their beverages, it helps to take that self-consciousness out. I think this is a little different than what you're saying because you're talking about people that you know. But my ability to make small talk, unless I'm in a really outgoing place, is pretty minimal. And my experience has been that I'll go to an event and I try and connect with someone. And either there's somebody that talks incessantly about something that I don't care about and there's no reciprocity, so it bores me to death. Or I find someone who's socially anxious and awkward and the conversation doesn't go anywhere. And I used to think it was a reflection of my awkwardness. And I think it's just somebody else that also doesn't have the ability to carry on a conversation. So I think there's so many things that come into play when we're put into environments that pull for skills that are not really what our strengths are, because we want to have, like you said, to be seen and heard, to have an intimate conversation with someone and to be able to go deep. And in a large environment where there's a lot going on, large meaning 6 people, it just makes it harder.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really interesting. And even with short amounts of time are also just not that great for me. My favorite thing is to spend an afternoon with my friends. And most people just don't have that kind of time. It's rare these days that people have that kind of time, but all my favorite experiences are where I get to really soak with a person, where we go deep and we talk about all the stuff going on in our lives. And maybe we share a meal or two, and we might even do something crafty, color together or paint together or something like that, where we can talk and do something creative. And that's what I love the most. And hardly anybody in my circle really has time for that. And when I do get that, I just feel so gifted. And I feel like then I can really be myself. I can really allow myself to come fully out and rest into the relationship.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm going to try and get through some of these questions. I'm looking at time. This has been such a great conversation and we've got questions to get to. What are some of your superpowers?
I am a person who's highly, highly observant and on many different levels. So I'm very audio oriented. So listening to people talk and speak really gives me a ton of information. And in fact, it's really handy as a coach because with my clients, what happens a lot is as they're speaking, certain words and phrases literally become like a hologram to me. It's like intuitively those things are sort of floating up as important, and I'm able to earmark those things so that when they've stopped talking, I can go back and check in on something. Or I'm sure you're good at that too. I'm really observant about people and environments, and like I'm the kind of person who could walk into a room and say, something's changed. What is it? Oh, there it is. I just have a really strong visual and audible command of my environment. As a result, I'm really good with beauty. My house is very beautiful. My gardens are very beautiful. I'm very artistic. I'm good with color. I'm good with shape and design and structure and things like that. So those are some of my superpowers. And I think my sensitivity, I would even call it that I'm empathic to a certain degree. I really can feel a lot of what's going on. Sometimes I don't always know what it is, but I can feel it with my clients. For example, I've sort of minorly tested this out, but sometimes I work with them by the phone, so I'm not seeing them, but I can imagine in my mind what their body position is, what their facial expressions might be. And I've checked in sometimes on that. What's happening with your body right now? What is the position you're in? Things like that. So I can somatically feel a lot. I'm really good at story. So if I do go to an event or experience of some sort, I can come back and I can replay that for someone with all the nuance. Yeah, I think I've hit those. Yeah.
I love it. What would you want to tell your younger self about being a highly sensitive person?
I think that I'd want to say it may not feel like it, but your sensitivity is a really powerful gift. And if you can accept it in yourself, fully accept all that that means, along with the limitations and the ways that you're different and apart from other people, if you can fully accept it, then you'll enjoy it and be able to make the most out of it and find your way in life in all aspects of life. You'll be able to find work that you love and that you're really good at, and you'll be able to find friends that you love who love you right back, and all those pieces. So I think it starts with acceptance.
I love that.
Yeah.
Rhonda, is there anything else about being a highly sensitive person that I didn't ask you that you want to talk about?
One of the questions that you sent me that I kind of want to answer that you didn't get to was, can you remember something someone said?
About being a highly sensitive person that felt hurtful or insensitive.
Yeah. And I'll just say that those people weren't necessarily clued in to what HSP is, but what I have found is doctors are the absolute worst.
Yes.
I just there's a part of me that just wishes I had the energy and drive to go out and teach doctors something, because they are so, for the most part, I mean, I've seen a lot of doctors because I've had a lot of chronic illness and things going on with my body that I have sought out answers for, and I'm not really doing that so much anymore because I found that just my own self-care is really the best way to treat my issues. But in some circumstances I still need to go see a doctor. I have just had one doctor after another be downright cruel with things they've said to me. One guy, so this was, when I hit perimenopause. I hit perimenopause and I had a lot of symptoms that just were pretty challenging. And I was trying to get some support. And the guy said to me, well, look, you're clearly a very depressed middle-aged woman, and that's what's bringing all this on. And I was just gobsmacked that he would say something so thoughtless and so downright mean. It felt very, very mean to me. And I sat there for a second and I glared at him and I said, you clearly have very little emotional intelligence.
I love it.
Has it occurred to you that as a sensitive person, who is experiencing a tremendous amount of pain at this time in my life, that might be a bit depressing. But the truth is, I'm not depressed.
Yeah.
I'm a very upbeat person. I'm very strong and courageous. I actually came to see you today thinking that a doctor might be interested in the challenges of an unusual patient, but apparently I've come to the wrong place.
I love that. My guess is that he didn't have the capacity to hear you.
Well, it was really funny what his reaction was, because he put his hand on his back and said, "No, I'm really experiencing a lot of pain right now myself. And I'm sorry. I just really, I'm in so much pain that I really can't deal with all of this."
So he made it all about himself and not being able to own his behavior.
Yeah. And I said, "Well, I think we're done here, you know?" And of course, I never went back to him again. But I think really, if I've been to 30 doctors in the last 20 years, which is probably about accurate, I would say only one of them, and that's my naturopath, who now is my doctor. If I have to go see a MD, then I'm always like, gosh, poop, I gotta go, I gotta go, you know, see this MD. But I really just don't like to do it if I don't have to.
Yeah, I love the fact that you said something to this doctor. I mean, before you even said it, my guess was that any doctor that responds that way really doesn't have the capacity to hear you, and it needs to be said. I worked in a hospital for 9 years. I have so many clients that have autoimmune disorders or have things that have gone on with them that just because a doctor can't find the answer, doctors aren't trained to go, "I hear you're in a lot of pain and I don't know what it is. Let's keep looking." They will make it about the patient. And there's even a meme about, I don't know if you call it a meme, but a graphic where somebody goes to the doctor and they're impaled with a big stake through their body. And,
I've seen that one.
And the doctor says, "You just need to lose 10 pounds.
Yeah.
And so this inability for especially highly sensitive people to be seen and heard by doctors, and when doctors don't know what's going on, it doesn't mean that what we're experiencing is not real. It means that they don't have the answer and they're not trained to go, I don't know, let's look a little harder." And there's so much shaming that goes on, especially if you carry any weight, because it will always be about your weight. Yeah, we need way more emotional intelligence with our healthcare providers.
Yeah. Yeah. And just for them to realize that just because you don't fit in the standard of care doesn't mean that you don't need support.
No, and it really takes a healthcare provider to have the awareness that they may not have all the answers. But what happens is if they don't have an answer, there's something wrong with you, or you must not be feeling it because they don't have an answer. And there are amazing naturopathic doctors out there. There are amazing traditional medical, doctors out there as well. And my guess is that every single listener has at least one story about what some insensitive MD said to them. I'm not trying to bash you. If you're doctors that are listening, I'm sure if you're listening, you're incredibly compassionate. And it sucks to be on the receiving end of thinking that this is someone who's going to help me. And then we end up feeling shamed and discounted.
Yeah. I just really long for the day when a larger part of the training that these doctors go through, which is immense and difficult, really has to do with compassion.
Yeah. Yeah. Rhonda, tell us about projects that you're working on, where people can find you.
Well, my biggest current project is my podcast, which is called Prosperous Coach Podcast. And I've been an international business coach for 20 years, and my target audience is other coaches, life coaches, those types of coaches, non-sports type coaches. And I love my podcast because of you, Patricia. And so if anybody wants to check out me or what I do, I'd say check out my podcast, because that's really where my heart and soul is going right now. And you can find it at prosperouscoach.com/podcast.
And do you have to be a coach in order to enjoy listening to your podcast? Like, I've listened to it, but I haven't listened to it with the thought of if I wasn't a coach, would I be interested? So can you speak to that?
I think it's really good for any type of solopreneur, any type of person who has a service-based business, who is a solopreneur. There are some specific things that are specific to coaches, but there's a lot of, a lot of my friends who are entrepreneurs have said to me, oh, that's good for anybody who's an entrepreneur.
And for those of you that are therapists, because I know we have a number of highly sensitive therapists that listen to this podcast, Rhonda has some great information on her podcast, so I would really suggest checking it out. And I just love, you're so articulate, and the quality of your podcast is just really amazing. So you're doing a great job.
Oh, thank you. I feel the same way about your podcast.
Yay. Is there anything else before we go?
I think we've covered it.
Well, thank you so much for being here today, Rhonda. This has really been fun.
My absolute pleasure.
All right. Have a blessed day.
Thank you.
All right. Bye-bye. Thank you so much for being here today. I hope you found this conversation helpful. I really think Rhonda brought so much to the conversation, and her specific examples, I can't help but believe that they didn't resonate with at least some of you. If you're enjoying this podcast, what would really be helpful is to tell other people about the podcast. If you can go to iTunes and rate and review. If you go to unapologeticallysensitive.com and click on any of the episodes, there are instructions on how to provide a rating and review on iTunes. It really makes a difference, and it helps other people find the podcast. If you have any questions or concerns, I love hearing from you. If there are topics that you want to hear about, I'm really here to serve you. And if you want to find out where to follow me on social media, again, please go to unapologeticallysensitive.com. I've got all of my social media handles there. Remember, sensitivity is nothing to apologize for. It's our superpower. Have a blessed day.